Hey guys, welcome back to my Tamiya Frog Build. We are now on steps 19 through 26, which is wiring, wheels, and tires. All right, so step 19, actually the rest of step 19, I covered the first part of step 19 in the last video, which is configuring the speed control. Now, I showed you how to do that with the speed control that is included with the kit. However, that's not the speed control that I'm actually going to use. I'm going to deviate from the manual just a little bit on how I install my electronics because I don't really like the place that Tamiya recommends installing the speed control. So what you have is you have your steering servo, and I'm going to affix my receiver to the side of my steering servo. I'm going to show you why just in a slide or so. So just like before, you want to put the double-sided tape that comes with the kit on the back side of the receiver. Put them on a table so that they're nice and flush. Make sure this front part here is nice and flush, and then just sandwich them together. Push good and firm, but not hard enough that you break your receiver, obviously. And this is what you should end up with. So what I've got here is a steering servo with the receiver taped to the side, and here is the speed control. So the speed control that I decided to go with is a Duratrax IntelliSpeed 12T modified. It isn't their absolute best brushed motor speed control, but it's pretty close. It has a number of features that the Tamiya one doesn't have. It has ABS braking. It has traction control for acceleration. It also can change the delay in acceleration. It also can change the delay between forward and reverse to help save your transmission, your differential, and it also has a brake lockout option because sometimes racing tracks require the cars to have their reverse to lock out so that you don't go to reverse ever and smash into the cars behind you. All right, so the reason why I went ahead and changed the position on this is because you can see that this speed control, well, the Tamiya one as well, they have a heat sink on the top and they build up a lot of heat. Now, when I tested it out with this speed control on the side of the servo, the speed control heatsink actually physically touched the chassis. So not only is that not good because you're going to have friction and wear and tear on your chassis, but the heat on this is going to possibly melt or certainly increase the heat on this. Maybe that's going to cause some chassis strain. The heat from this will also impact your steering servo because these things can get hot. And this is an electric motor with gears and lubrication inside. I was afraid that the excess heat was going to negatively affect my steering servo. And the real big issue was that once you install it, you can't get to the buttons. So you have to pull this out in order to adjust it, which I just thought was crazy. So I'm going to reverse the position from what the instructions say on where the speed control and the receiver should go. So I'm going to put the speed control in the belly of the chassis. We're going to use some double-sided tape to affix it to the black double bar sort of mounting bracket they have in the bottom of the chassis. I'm going to run the wires facing the back. We've got the power switch coming out the side, and this is the receiver wire plugged into channel 2 as per my receiver instructions. Okay, so we've got the speed control installed, we've got the power lines coming out the side of the chassis, and we've got the bracket moved down so that I could screw my steering servo into the brackets. As you can see, there's plenty of space for this receiver. I might even be able to plug and unplug wires, although I think I would probably just remove the 2 screws and pull this sort of double module out in order to plug and unplug wires into this section, but that's what it looks like. If you flip the chassis upside down, you can see that this is that black plastic mounting bracket that I've taped the speed control to. Now, this is tapered. These tubes are tapered, which I really wish they wouldn't have done because there's no way to get the tape to touch these because they taper. So the only place the tape is actually touching is this middle section here. I really wish they would have at least made maybe the top part of these square to give me a lot more surface area. So that's one downside to this particular design. I wish that they would have designed this piece up a little bit nicer. The other thing that I did was, so I've got my receiver wires here sort of bundled in the front and secured with a zip tie, just here in the very nose of the vehicle, just in front of the speed control. So here's a power switch. It's a very small power switch compared to the one that came with the Tamiya unit. So I just took some of the double-sided tape, cut it to the width of the switch plate, stuck this down, and then I put this on top of my cutting mat, and I cut out the excess tape so that the tape was the exact size and shape of the switch itself. And then I stuck it down onto the chassis here. So by putting the extra tape along this long skinny part, it gave me some extra friction because the switch is going to be moving this direction, this direction. And you can see the switch has got a slight trapezoidal shape to it, which is why I went ahead and cut out the extra bits. One, so I could get this a little bit closer, and two, I don't need extra tape here to gather dirt and debris. Now, back in the day, the Frog actually used a switch plate that screwed into these two mounting points here, and that switch plate still comes in the kit. So if you don't want to double-sided tape your switch to the chassis this way, you can use two screws, screw the switch plate on here, put your switch down onto that, and use two screws so that the switch wires sort of poke up and go in, and the switch itself is underneath. It's very bulky, sort of protrudes out about as far as this does almost. And it looks not quite as nice as this arrangement here, so it's really up to you. If you don't trust double-sided tape, or if you just prefer having things screwed down, or you want to do it a little bit more vintage style, that's what that switch plate is for. And this is what the vehicle looks like when it's all finished that step. You can see the speed control has tons of space above it now in the chassis for heat to escape. I've got plenty of room that I can access that configuration button and see the LED lights, so that if I do get to a track that requires me to turn off my reverse, or if I want to adjust my brake delay or my acceleration delay, I can do all that. With the speed control glued to the side of the steering servo, I'd have no access to that button, wouldn't be able to see the light, and the heat sink would touch this. So step 20 is the steering rods, and we've got the steering rods laying down on top of the manual to make sure we've got the right bits, and you'll need two of these ball ends. Now the beautiful thing about Tamiya is they actually outline your steering rods, so you've got your left and your right steering rods, and you screw them down in until the item matches the outline, and that way you've got them at least a very good adjustment point, like to start off with, and do that for both sides. So this is your servo saver. Step 21 is to attach your servo saver. Now the servo saver is really important. Some new people might not understand what the purpose of this is, but the servo steering is called a direct servo connection, which means the steering arms connect directly to the servo. There's no intermediary, which means if you hit something hard, you can actually strip out the gears in your servo. I'm not talking about this little gear here. I'm talking about the gears inside the servo. You can strip those gears out, thus ruining your servo. So you've got this servo saver, which acts as a buffer in between the rim, the tires, and your servo itself. So you build this unit here. Now you need to use the one with the step up, okay? And you get this bracket here that matches with your servo, because the gearing on this little gear nub on the servos is different. So if you're using a Futaba like I am, or a Tamiya servo, use part S4. If you're using a Sanwa or ACOM style gear, then you need to use S7. They're not interchangeable. The gear teeth number are different, so you can't switch them back and forth. Also, the screw that you use will depend upon your servo as well. I went ahead and used this screw that came with my receiver and transmitter. So this came out of the servo. My servo had an X-arm pre-installed. I unscrewed that, popped the X-arm off, and then assembled this guy using the appropriate parts, and I reused the screw. And this is what it looks like when it's on. So you've got your steering arms, and they go up through the bottom of the servo saver, okay? And then the servo saver snaps onto this. Now, I highly recommend snapping a battery onto this, turning everything on before you attach your servo saver to your steering servo, and make sure that your steering trim is centered on your transmitter, and then go ahead and turn everything off, and then you can snap your servo saver down on top. Okay, step 22 is building the front wheel. So as you can tell, this is not the stock front tire that comes with the kit. I had originally purchased this vehicle as a basher unit. I thought I would just bang around the yard, possibly, at a dirt road or on a trail or something somewhere with my kid and his grasshopper. But as it turns out, I didn't realize this until just a little while ago, there are quite a number of racetracks around, and the racetracks are mostly clay dirt. Um, and in the springtime, they'll be a little wet and soppy, but you can't run on them then. But once the weather clears out and springtime goes away and goes into late spring and summer, those things are going to get just really wicked hard. So the front smoothie tires, in my opinion, are mostly worthless. I just don't think they have any traction whatsoever. If you're just a basher car driving around the driveway, having fun with friends and yourself or what have you, then they're fine. However, if you're going to run on a track, they're not good for pretty much anything. So I went ahead and I got some fast attack vehicle rims and tires. The one thing I want to point out is that you definitely want to use ball bearings. Even if you don't buy the whole ball bearing kit, which you should, it's worth the $12 or whatever you can get them for on Amazon, but definitely you want ball bearings for your front tires. And there's one on either side, so you want at least 4. I think they're number 1150 ball bearings. They're dirt cheap. They will save your axles. The car will run better. It's just, trust me, you want to go with ball bearings. So anyways, these are fast attack vehicle tires. And these are fast attack vehicle back tires. The rims are different, although they put together the same way that the stock ones do. As you can see, this is the pointy spike pin spikes that come on the stock tire are gone, and we've got a much smoother tread. These are the same tires that the Subaru Brat uses, fast attack vehicle, other vehicles as well. So if you're going to run around on pavement, don't use the spike tires that come with this car. They will wear out in a heartbeat. They don't get good traction in that situation. If you're going to run it on any kind of hard surface whatsoever, those pin spiky tires are just not going to be your friend. So you want to pick up something that's a little bit smoother. Now, because the fast attack vehicle tires don't fit the stock Frog rims, if you do want to take my advice and not use those spiky tires because you're going to run the car on really hard surfaces and you want to get out of it for a little bit less money, you could always go with grasshopper tires. Okay, so the grasshopper tires, as you can see, have this subtle paddle wheel designed to them. All right, they fit the standard rims. They won't wear out nearly as fast on the pavement. They'll work fine on hard packed surfaces like dried clay. I mean, they're still going to wear out, of course, and certainly on pavement they're going to wear out the fastest. But these tires are a much better choice for running on really hard surfaces using the rims that come with the Frog. But you need to know how to put the rims together. The front rims and the back rims go together the same. The back rims are quite a bit harder, so I'm going to show you how to do that. So these are the spiky tires. Oh, and if you're going to run it in the grass, then these pin spikies work great. Grass and loose, soft dirt, even like pea stone type rocks, these will work fine. It's just the hard, smooth surfaces that these things are not your friend. So what you're going to do is you're going to take there are 3-piece rims. You've got a outer, inner, and a middle, and this is the middle bit. Right, so you take the middle bit and you jam it down into the tire, and this is going to be tough. And when you finally get it in, this is what it's going to look like. All right, and you then give it a 90-degree twist so that the rim is going the right direction. But oftentimes what you'll have is the tire is sort of up on the edge, and it needs to be down on this inner ledge here. So in order to get it down there, the best thing for you to do is just sort of squeeze the tire like this, and then the rubber will sort of drop down off that upper part and right down onto this ledge, which is where this inner bead is supposed to be, is on this ledge. And this is what it should look like when you have it proper. All right, so this is the outer part of the rim, the rim inner, this is the middle part of the rim facing out. All right, and then you can see the rubber is lined nice and flush on that inner ledge. So then what you want to do is you want to find your inner section, okay? And you can tell because the inner section has the recessed wells for the nuts, and the inner part of the middle rim piece is taller. It's really tall. It'll come up through the middle here. Then you get the outer part of the rim, okay? And you can tell that the outer part of the wheel has got a much smaller hub to it, and the outer part of the rim has got a much bigger hole. So you drop this down into here. Now it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. You need all 3 parts to align up perfectly because the screws have got to go through these. Now, you don't probably want to use a screwdriver or something to act as a lever to try to get these three things lined up. You're much better off just sort of dropping it down and making sure that it's aligned up. And if you're off even a fraction, if this hole doesn't look like a perfect tube, if there's any bit of not perfect roundness to it at all, just go ahead and pop off whichever side is not aligned up right, give it a small little turn and drop it down on again. Trust me, you don't want to mess up the inner part of this with metal. So you flip it back over, so you're looking at the inside of the rim, and you get your 5 tiny, tiny, tiny little screws, and you put them one at a time on the screw well. Okay, now they're probably not going to line up just perfectly for you, because that's just the way nature works. All right, so they're going to probably be a little crooked when you set one down, and do one at a time. You don't want to have to mess with 5 at a time because they're just going to fall out on you anyways. All right, so one at a time you set them up, and if they line up a little crooked, go ahead and use your finger to sort of turn it until it drops. Now when it drops, it's not going to drop totally flush. You're going to end up with one side much deeper than the other. In this case, you can get a small Phillips head screwdriver to push down on this end. If you're lucky, it'll drop down real easy. If you're not lucky, it might push down a little bit harder, but it has to be perfect in its octagon here, right? 2, 4, 6, hexagon. Has to be perfect in its hexagon. And when it's down perfect in its hexagon, this is what it should look like, is this nut is pushed all the way to the bottom of the well, and its perfect hexagon is lined up with the plastic of the well. You don't want to jam this down in, messing up this hexagonal shape in the plastic, because that's what's going to act as your holder. Then you put your thumb or your finger on the back side to keep the nut from falling out of its little well, flip the tire over, and put a screw in. Okay, now when you're doing all your screws, you want to go in a star pattern. So I put one screw in and I've tightened it down. Now I've got the other screw ready to go the rest of the way in. So this is the direction I'm going. And you tighten it down until the screw itself is just a little bit flush or just tiny little bit protruding past the nut. Now this works if the nut is all the way into its well. If the nut is not into its well, then you want to make sure you get that nut pushed all the way down so that you have about this much space. You don't want to tighten it all the way down because you want those rim pieces to have a tiny little bit of play as you put in the rest of your screws in. Once you get all the screws in and you go in that, you install them in that star pattern. Once they're all installed to that tightness that I showed you, then you go back through again and you tighten one down until it's snug, star pattern all the way around until they're snug. And once you're done, this is what your rims will look like. Okay, step 24, attaching the front wheels. It's real simple. You just put them on. It's nothing super complicated about it. The instruction manual shows to use some grease. I went ahead and did that even though I've got ball bearings. If you're using ball bearings, you can probably get away with not putting a little bit of grease on there, but I don't think the grease hurts any, so I went ahead and did it. You've got your end nut here, which is a self-locking nut. So what you'll do is you tighten it down until it snugs up, give it just a little bit more. You use your little Tamiya tool to do that with. Don't over tighten this because you want to be able to get them off in the future. So snug them down enough so that they don't back out, then you're good to go. The rear wheels are a little different. They don't have ball bearings, but they do have this locking hub. So what you'll do is you'll pull the cotter pin out and you'll put this drive axle pin in. I'd really recommend that you put this pin in horizontally with the ground so that it doesn't drop out on you because you want gravity to be your friend. As you can see, I've got ball bearings in the back here too, which again, highly recommend. Now what happens is this slides over the axle and this pin goes into the groove. And you've got two different ways you can put it in. It doesn't matter which way, it just makes it easier so there's more than just one. And then once you get that pushed all the way flush, so your hub should be pushed up against the rear arm, and then you put the tire on. All right. Now you need to make sure the tire goes the right direction. So those nuts with their little nut wells are facing inside. All right. So you can see the screw heads on the outside. But when you put the tire on, it's not going to be aligned up perfectly. So remember, there are 5 nuts, and on the hub there are 5 holes. See? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what you've got is those little nut wells go into those holes. So what you'll do is hold your finger here to keep it from rotating, and then turn the tire slightly while putting slight pressure in so that when the little nut wells align up with these holes, it just clips in. And you'll feel it snap and you'll be able to see the screws through these holes. And that's how you know you have your rear tire on fully. Notice that there's no big space in between here, because if there's a big space, that little pin will fall out. Attaching the antenna mast is the next part of this step. All right. So the way I did it was I screwed on these little trapezoidal bits, and then I put the antenna on here. So don't over tighten these because you can strip out your chassis bit, and if those things get stripped out, then you're hurting. So these things insert into this hole exactly the same way that the steering arm's inserted into the servo saver. You put the little bit in, 90-degree angle, it pushes the rest of the way in, and then you screw it down with one of those screws that has like a washer built in. The head is quite a bit larger to hold that in. Now, this is my antenna. You can see it protruding out the top here. So it goes from the receiver along the length of the car and then up. Now, I'm using a newer receiver that has a 2.4 gigahertz transmission frequency. Back in the day when I was building these, they were all AM based. If you bought, say, a Futaba Attack, because they're like $50 on Amazon, amazing deal. For starting out with, I think. They're still using the AM frequency, so the antenna will be wicked long. It'll, run up the whole mast, and you'll see in the instructions that that's how they have it laid out, and you have to sort of wrap the antenna wire around the mast and around the loop at the top, and then maybe even back down again some and tie it off. But these little 2.4 gigahertz jobbies are super short. So what I did was I got a piece of heat shrink tubing. I pushed it down on the antenna mast, made sure that the antenna itself went up into the heat shrink tubing along the mast itself, and then I shrunk it with the hairdryer. So now we've got this wonderful little heat shrink tube that is very slick, and it will hold that antenna perfectly. I made sure that the antenna was on the inside of the antenna mast, so when this thing flips over, inevitably the antenna itself is not going to be abraded by the ground. Maybe, if I hit a good rock or something, it might even cut this heat shrink tubing and right down to the mast itself, the mast metal itself. So by putting the antenna on the inside of the mast, I'm protecting it from any kind of damage. All right, so step 26 is called installing the battery and installing the underguard. All right, I've always called this a skid plate. I've never heard of it called an underguard before. So the underguard is installed with 3 screws, 1 long and 2 short. And this is what it looks like when it's installed, and this is going to protect your steering servo and your receiver and all your wiring here that I showed you. It was in the front of the vehicle underneath this metal guard. All right, so with the battery, what I found was that the batteries that I'm using have the wires that stick out the very middle of the battery pack. All right, and the default positioning of these trapezoidal shaped bits, they were too tight up against the chassis, and the battery wasn't fitting well. I could loosen these screws up a bit, and that would give enough slack so that the battery fit, but then they were sort of angled like this, and they were loose and floppy. I didn't like that at all either. All these trapezoidal shaped plastic pieces are for is to keep the battery, because the battery is perpendicular to the car body, and when you turn, it keeps the battery from falling out of your car from centrifugal force. All right, so what I did was I went to Home Depot and I bought a 10-pack of number 6 stainless steel washers, and I put 2 washers on the inside, so it goes chassis, washer, bracket, screw. I did that on both sides of the vehicle, and that gave just enough space so that I could put the battery in, the wire could be pushed up against this as well, and there's no pinching, there's no cutting, there's no angles. It's perfect. So I'd highly recommend going into a hardware store and picking yourself up 8 number 6 washers and giving yourself a little bit of extra space. And this is what the rolling chassis looks like when it's completed, right? We've got the engine installed, the tires are on, our electronics are installed. I've got the battery in, as you can see. Now you can see what I'm talking about with the wires. They're pushed right up against this. And we're ready to roll. You can drive it around the house or whatever. I wouldn't bring it outside until you get a chassis on the top, but some people do because they're so excited. But this is what we'll look like when we're done. So in the next video, I'm going to cover steps number 27 and 28, which is attaching the driver figure to the chassis after it's been painted, and cutting out the body and wing. And then after that is basically just painting up the body and going out and having fun. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give me a like. If you have any comments or something else that I said that you'd like to expand upon or make other tips and tricks to other people who are building their frogs, please go ahead and leave a comment.